I just pinged Jeremy, who is on the way. So I'm gonna give him like a minute or two, as well as Paul. Jeremy also wants me to tell you he's having technical difficulties, so we will have to entertain ourselves for a little bit longer. Yeah, I got logged out of Slack too, which is annoying me. Hark.
Hello, sorry about that.
Hello, no problem.
All right, yeah, technical difficulties, but I am in and the screen sharing should be enabled.
Sweet. This one. Right, yeah.
Wonderful.
Cool. Sorry, my screen just got weird, but okay, I wanted to take a little bit of time to do a little KubeCon recap, debrief, especially from the stuff that was specific about SIG MC, so that it's on the record, you know, and also maybe we can talk about how that affects some new stuff that we want to get started on, especially I think as related to like ContribX a little bit, because that was a topic, but I will get to that when I get to that, if that's cool. And yeah, so there's some notes here from both 10/24, which is when we had a meeting at the Contributor Summit with, I don't know, like 20 something maybe people, to talk about a couple different topics, and we had sort of a split between people who wanted to talk about networking, people who wanted to talk about coordination. So I want to go over those notes a little bit because I think that is very topical and will probably inform some of the other stuff that we want to do. And then I do want to highlight that on 10/28, that's when the intro and deep dive was streamed. At least when I checked yesterday, they're not on YouTube yet. But when it is, I'll slide that in there so that people can take a look. And then I did link in the slides as well. And basically, I made myself a few little notes here of what I think the larger topics or kind of like the pullout topics were to me from, again, kind of everything that's down here in 10/24. There's like lots of words of things that were discussed that maybe doesn't make a ton of sense, but I felt like these sort of two things came out of the networking breakout, and then Jeremy, I don't know if you have anything to add on from the coordination breakout because I wasn't there on that side. And then I want to talk a little bit about what some people said about contribx and like how to contribute to SIG-MC, or even how to like participate in the calls. So I want to figure out if there's any changes we want to make there as well. So just a quick recap of these two that were talked about in the networking breakout. One thing that came up a lot was how to modify or have some flexibility in the cluster set guarantees related to being like trusted together, or the strongest expression of their trust together is the concept of namespace sameness. And one potential variation of how such a thing might be achieved was to have a sort of different concept of how cluster set to cluster set interacts with each other that maybe is not as strong sounding, so that there could be like a weaker link. And one of the like big use cases that was talked about was when there's not some centralized administration for, the entire fleet of clusters that may be comprised of several different teams that can manage their own sort of trust domain, but they can't make as many guarantees about other people's clusters, but they still might need services from them. So that was a discussion point, and I'll pause here in case there's some reaction right now. But that was like a pretty main discussion point. And I do think the question of like namespace sameness and how it truly applies has come up a couple different times. It's certainly something that makes MCS itself as like valuable and predictable as it is. So sophisticating it more has its own trials and tribulations, but this was the latest installation of kind of asking that type of question. Okay, cool. So yeah, I will segue into this topic, which is was also talked about on the networking side of the table, which was basically about the Gamma initiative, which let me see if I can find I think I have a reference in here somewhere. This one, just to remind us of what this is. So there is a effort within Gateway API called Gamma. I don't know what this stands for, but anyways, that is about making Gateway API as it is as the project of SIG network, and all the service meshes converge together, at least at the level which Gateway API has jurisdiction over. And right now, in terms of maturity of this project, there's one KEP basically about how a service mesh should be referenced in Gateway API that kind of sought to make the minimal amount of Gateway API, like API changes. And then there's another work in progress KEP about how service meshes should opt in to sort of legacy service mesh behavior in terms of service discovery versus more granular types like MCS provides. So that's really topical and interesting to us. And the larger future next projects view is to provide some sort of conformance testing suite so that Gateway API implementations can make sure that they're following, including the service meshes. And so that's what is kind of going on over there, and some of it intersects with us. And about our like overarching, kind of interesting space MCS takes about bridging a gap between single cluster services and then like a whole service mesh. So yeah, so that came up. So I'll just like reiterate that, and maybe I'll drop in here too that those two KEPs that I mentioned from Gamma Initiative, but there's some energy, especially from the Gamma folk and SIG network to have this more broadly known, and also its overlap with us, keep the conversation going. So that's that. If anybody has any thoughts or inquiries about that point. And then for coordination, Jeremy, do you have any like larger topics to bring up?
Yeah, this was actually a really cool conversation, because one of the things that came up when we met up was that as a SIG, we've kind of been overtrained potentially on networking, and I think for very good reason, because in multi-cluster, you need to solve networking before you can really do much else. But it was great to kind of talk about the higher level issues. And I think in our conversations, the big categories that came up were kind of two buckets. So one was like actually coordinating like getting config and workloads into clusters, and the other bucket was enforcement and policy. So there were some interesting questions raised, like how do you actually deal with like mismatching Kubernetes versions in your cluster set and CRDs being different in each cluster. We talk about namespace sameness. Well, no matter how good your rollout is, for at least some period of time, there's going to be different versions in each cluster within your cluster set. And so if you're, if we're trying to communicate to, an application owner that living within a namespace in any cluster in their cluster set should be the same, but there's the reality of, at least temporary misalignment. How do we figure that out? I think another question that came up that on the coordination side that comes up every once in a while is like, what does a multi-region control plane look like? Is that actually a multi-region cluster? Personally, I don't think it is, because when you spread your etcd replicas across regions, things get really interesting. But clearly, we do need some kind of multi-region controller, or at least something that can be deployed multi-region. So some subset of functionality came up as kind of an open question. And the last thing that came up is maybe the SIG could do a better job of writing, tutorials for people getting started, for, how do I use, MCS, how do I use the About API? So anyone who's interested in kind of jumping in here, just writing out some samples that we can throw on a SIG GitHub could be really, really useful for folks who are kind of new to multi-cluster and just don't know where to start.
Yeah, I think good segue to the topic of contribx, because definitely like there are a lot of new faces at the meet and greet for the contributors summit for SIG Multicluster, but like, well, first off, it was a great opportunity for us to be like, hey, what would make it easier for you to contribute? And they were very helpful to indicate that like our existing projects are kind of confusing, at least in terms of how they're supposed to be used, how they're supposed to be used in conjunction with other things. I think that's come up here too about like, we can, say in the SIG meeting that like best practice is Gateway for North-South and MCS for East-West, but without enough, examples or articulation of that outside of there, it's not super clear. And then even from the contributing standpoint, there was, like one of the kind of longstanding issues for MCS has been working on some of the end-to-end tests. But there was interest in like if there was a sort of deep dive on how that works. And then in any case, that's relevant if we want people to use, if we want implementations to use them as conformance tests, which is the idea, then like the people need to know how it works. So at least for that specific one in the short term, like I put a queue for the next one to talk about that. Interestingly, Gamma API is actually having this exact same question about conformance tests. So like we're all doing the same thing at the same time. But yeah, there was basically this like lack of like documentation. And then the other point was not enough other topics besides networking. Even though there's appetite for this coordination category, it's not talked about a lot. And, I think that's just a matter of like what's on the agenda, but I think we can, maybe this is on the first hand, this is a call to everybody of how like a lot of people want to talk about that and bring their use cases. And we can make sort of more fertile ground for that, I think, by maybe like pre-scheduling some like specific day that's like coordination takeover, tap takeover, or whatever for a meeting, and like get the word out a little bit on the mailing list so people know to show up and bring their use cases, instead of it being kind of like reactive to what's topical of the week on someone's mind. So that's an idea there. And then one thing I wanted to bring up here in this category is on the point of lack of documentation and tutorials. Jeremy, you were just talking about the README or putting some documentation in the GitHub, which is great. People were talking about how Gateway API has this cute little SIGs website that's like really user-friendly and gives some broader info. And I expect I already know that some of the Gamma work is encapsulated in here. And I don't know if this is, I don't think we have the bandwidth to do something like this right now or alone for our sub projects, but I'm wondering if this is like even a direction we want to go, because this is kind of, I feel this is kind of a larger question of like, for things that are out of tree, where does their like documentation go? And then even more meta, for things that are out of tree that interact together, like Gateway API and MCS, where you need to turn both of them on to get the full experience, like how do we connect the dots there outside of just in our separate little implementation docs, or outside of maybe our individual SIG docs, or something like more together? So
I
that's my
personally really like
question.
the idea of having like a SIG MC website where we can make things a little more discoverable than reading random readmes sprinkled throughout
Mhm.
GitHub.
Mhm.
And because yeah, one of the things too is like how to use Gateway and MCS together.
Yeah.
I think that's something we could publish on both sites. But yeah, this is definitely part of an open question of how do out of tree things get visibility.
Yeah.
Uh, I personally like the Gateway API website and would not be opposed to using it as a template.
Yeah, I 100% say that if we could all get on the same vibe, that would probably be useful to humans who want to look at different sites for similar info.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mike, agree 100%.
Oh, I missed the chat.
Centralized
Oh, yeah.
discoverability for would-be end users is a big benefit that is more needed with editory work. Yeah, so I think this is something we can take a look at, maybe getting started in the next few weeks. Let's see what we can do and what content we can put there. But if anyone is interested, and maybe we can send a blast out to the forum too. But if anyone's interested in like just writing out some getting started tutorials, that would be really cool.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. I think probably we need like the scaffolding, the skeleton, which hopefully we can just like savagely clone Gateway API. Knowing some Gateway people are in this call right now, you have been warned. But yeah, I think then there's a place that even like, to our question before of like, can some people write some tutorials, or that, that's like an opportunity. We don't have a great place to track the issues even right now, I guess, unless we did it in the, yeah, I'm not even sure where we would do something like that. And then the actual destination for such things, if we are in the mood for not a README lifestyle, but more of a website lifestyle, then I think we can initiate the scaffolding so that there's somewhere for people to put it. Yeah, and Mike also mentions in the chat that it's a good on-ramp for new contributors to get more engaged, and I 10,000% agree that that's the case. So I think that helps achieve some of our Contrib-X goals. So yeah, so that was like the recap from my perspective, at least for like the SIG multi-cluster hangouts. Did I miss anything glaring, Jeremy? Guess I caught you for.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I'll mention that scrolling down, there are other topics in here with some notes, especially like things that were kind of ongoing projects that I just wanted to, mention, but we weren't like heavily discussed. So some of those notes are in there. And then just a separate other sort of thing, not from the conversations that were specific to SIG-MC, like not the meet and greet for SIG-MC, but just like around the conference, I personally was looking for a lot of like talks about that at least like mentioned multi-cluster, see what's going on. And I did feel like there's some interesting stuff coming out of controller runtime and the operator SDK. So there's a talk about that was by some Red Hat folks and was like ultimately about OCM, I think, like fundamentally, at least the multi-cluster part of it. The talk was kind of about something broader than just multi-cluster, but there was some sort of like that service needs to provide a like multi-cluster control plane basically. And there were some ideas in there about both how to deal with your existing controllers and also like what that means for any like sort of cluster registry or sort of centralized broker type thing. So yeah, I think that might be some fertile grounds for discussion in the future too, and something that, yeah, I'm happy to facilitate and follow up on either in the Slack or as an agenda topic for people who are interested in the multi-cluster control plane and like coordination question. I'm sure Work API has some things to say on that topic too. So yeah, those were my hot takes. This has been Hot Takes with Laura. KubeCon Hot Takes.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah. So, but that's what I kind of wanted to cover today. And then hopefully this can give us some fertile ground for kind of like the next set of work. Let me make some other AIs on here about savagely steal the gateway API website and then follow up on controller runtime operator SDK work and work API as an example, and anything else about multi-cluster and multi-region control plane. I think those are the standing topics. Cool. I cede the rest of my time to the chair.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Looks like that's our agenda for today. So unless anyone else has anything they want to add, I think we can reconvene in a couple weeks. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon and on Slack.
Cool. Okay, see you later. Bye.